Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. Group of 5 previews officially underway. If you haven't already checked out the American Athletic, encourage you to do so. Conference USA already in the can. And most importantly, a conference near and dear to my co-host, the Mid-American, on the docket today. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by college football handicapper extraordinary Brad Powers. And Brad, this is the conference you live for. It's the conference where your alma mater's from. It's midweek madness throughout November. I mean, it's all about the MAC, buddy. I hope you're ready for it.
I am. I was literally born and ready for this conference because it's all I knew growing up, being, right around in the middle of the heart of MAC country, going to a MAC school. I followed it, let's just say this, my entire life more than most. I'll put it that way.
I thought you were going to say board ready instead of born ready going into some of these teams in the league and exactly the kind of product they're going to field. We'll get to all the teams in depth, some other comprehensive handicapping questions as well. But Brad, before we get things kicked off here, I do have a question for you. You put out a tweet over the weekend that was relatively controversial in the BTB home offices, calling Sisu the best movie that you've seen in 2023. I mean, we like to give everyone an opportunity to defend all of their opinions, no matter how polarizing they may be. Payne and I gave a review of it. I don't think our listeners were thrilled, but you come at it diametrically opposed. So the floor is yours, kind sir.
Oh, wow. Well, let's start off with I've only seen 5 or 6 movies so far this year. I'm just counting what's come out this year, so or at least at the end of 2022. So there's that. We'll start with that. Payne was expecting he wanted an actual rating on it. He thought I was going to go like high 8s or something. I was like, man, it was 7.7. I mean, it was a best movie I've seen this year, but it's not like, best movie I've seen in my life type of situation. But I don't know. I'm all about what are expectations going in, and did they live or not live up to expectations? And so many movies and everything today just fail to meet up to expectations, or at least how everybody talks about them. I mean, I don't know what more you wanted in the movie. I mean, I wanted to see Nazis die. We saw that. It was a short movie. I love 90-minute movies. I don't have the attention span to go over 2 hours anymore. So we had that. They literally advertised that the dog didn't die, so the dog didn't die. And there was not much dialogue. I mean, I don't think much people can write that well anymore. So I like that there was few words. So what was your guys' expectation? You thought it was going to be an Oscar film or what?
No, I mean, look, Payne picks on me all the time. He tells me I've lost an appreciation for true action movies. He tells me I need some of the psychological thrillers that end up pissing him off when he's dedicated 2 hours to watching a movie to it. I honestly didn't know what to expect from all of it, so I thought it was entertaining for what it was. Honestly, I came out going, I'm not sure if this is supposed to be a comedy or exactly how I'm supposed to respond. So I think that's what kind of boxed me in a little bit, put my mind in a pretzel. I'm just still trying to figure out, and it's not a spoiler by any stretch for those folks who want to go see it. Brad, that he was able to walk away from that plane crash is a it's a modern marvel in overall medicine. I mean, that was eye-opening to me. That's like Tom Cruise doing his stunts in Mission Impossible.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to be, taken seriously. I'll put it that way. So, yeah, I think, keep in mind, it's a foreign film. It's, I think, Finland. So, there's a little bit, it's a little different than your, typical American action movie, but I liked it. I don't know how you couldn't walk away from that and actually liked it. Let me ask you this before we go down too far here. I mean, what's your favorite action movies of like the last decade? I'll give you a few of mine. I mean, I know it's almost a decade, but Mad Max Fury Road I think is one of the best action movies I've ever seen. And I liked one a couple years ago, Nobody, with Better Call Saul. I mean, as an action movie. So those are two of my favorites recently. What do you like?
No, Mad Max was outstanding. I mean, the visual effects and everything else that were in that movie, you talk about very limited dialogue and all of that. I thought they did a great job. And part of the appeal, when Payne sold me on going to see the movie when I was looking for something, he goes, they described it as Mad Max meeting John Wick. And I guess we did have the dog in the movie, but I didn't know if it really had some of that Mad Max component. Honestly, I'm probably the worst person to ask about action movies and all of that. Like I said, it's not typically a genre that I gravitate towards. Payne picks on me nonstop. And apparently I know where this is going, where the two of you will be able to gang up on me. I have not seen...
No, that's all right. No, I forgot, down to married life, you've been mainly probably rom-coms the last decade or so.
Honestly, I'm the one that picks the movies, and my better half goes, these movies are terrible that you pick. Like, I shouldn't allow you to try and pick movies ever again. Some of the rom-coms and those sort of things that she'd want to see, probably better than the movies that I've chosen, and Payne will never forgive me for sending him to see the movie Nightmare Alley with Bradley Cooper. I think that might have been where, in his estimation, that I really hit rock bottom.
You liked Nightmare Alley?
I did. I mean,
I did too.
Those are the movies
awesome.
for me I like. I mean, I was a reader as a kid, so it was all the macabre. It was the darker thought process, the psychological thrillers. I mean, those are the ones for me that I always find in my wheelhouse.
So I'm going to totally agree with you. I like Nightmare Alley. That would be a top 10 movie for me in the last 5 years. So I think it's Payne, actually, that might be off. The more I dive into this.
I mean, lowest common denominator. We know how things work around here. And like we said, we could take our shots because we got a couple more Group of 5 previews before Payne comes out of retirement to jump back into the Power 5 conferences. But I like what you did there. I mean, you talked about expectations, and that's always key when we're looking at assessments for a lot of college football teams. And when we discuss the MAC, I mean, parity has probably been the word best used to describe the league. 11 of the 12 conference members have played for a title at some point. 9 different programs have won the league. Eastern Michigan, that one team out of the 12 that hasn't yet gotten to a conference championship. When you look at the MAC and its revamped schedule of sorts, each team, 8 conference games, 5 versus divisional opponents, and 3 games against programs in the opposite division. I feel like we have to remind everybody now, Brad, because people don't know if they're divisions, people don't know how you end up making the conference championship, and all of that. The one thing I will say, when we look at last year's MAC championship, we got Ohio versus Toledo, but it was a far cry from each team coming in at full strength. So a lot of optimism and reason to be excited about those two programs, which we'll get to, given their quarterback play. But the return of the MAC, Brad, it doesn't appear imminent. I mean, this looks like a league that is a shell of its former self, given what we've grown accustomed to going back 5-10 years, where they used to be the gold standard when it came to Group of 5 performances.
Well, I think it's a little longer than 5 to 10 years now. I know the years go by quick, but it's been on the downfall for a while now. But I'm a pretty nostalgic person. But you don't have to. I mean, I'm not going back to the 70s or whatnot. Let's just go back to the late 90s, early 2000s, where I do agree with you. I think this was the best small conference in college football. And I mean, just look at some of the ratings out there. Jeff Sagarin's pretty close to a Vegas power rating. Like 99, Marshall's number 13. 2000, Toledo has a number 16 team. This isn't AP poll stuff. This is who would be favored over who on a neutral. I mean, 2003, Miami of Ohio, led by Ben Roethlisberger. I saw this team in person. Number 5 in Jeff Sagarin's final ratings. Can you imagine today? I mean, I know it's 20 years now, but a day where a MAC team would be top 5 in a power rating. I mean, that's just amazing to me to see how far this conference has fallen. So, flash forward, to, like you mentioned, 5-10 years ago, I started looking at my own power ratings. What's the average team power rating, and what's happened in just the last 7-8 years, and it has fallen. So I just took the first 4 years I started doing power ratings on my own, 2015 to 18. And the average power rating from those 4 years compared to the last couple of years, I mean, the average MAC team's fallen about 5 points. So, I mean, that's pretty significant. And it's not getting better. I'm here to tell you, it's not some, outlander. Oh, they just had a couple of down years as a conference. I expect it to continue to drop because, there's a couple things in play here. Number one, I mean, generally speaking, population shift. I mean, it's moving south, it's moving west. There's just not as many people. I would say the best and brightest aren't still, no disrespect, my family's still in Ohio, but a lot of people are moving to other locations in the country, Sun Belt. And, the downfall of the MAC has coincided with the rise of the Sun Belt in the last 10, 15 years. And then I think another thing is the transfer portal has really crushed this conference, and we'll talk about it today, individual teams, where we'll talk about every single team, 2-3 guys, some of their best players have left via transfer portal.
Yeah, I mean, I know we touched on it a little bit with Conference USA. It almost feels like some of the smaller leagues have become feeding frenzies for the Power 5 teams, especially those with geographic proximity, although a couple of these rosters have been picked over by teams on coasts that you wouldn't expect. Like you said, more on that in a little bit. The MAC, though, in terms of top to bottom, I mean, we'll talk about the individual teams. We'll provide deep dive breakdowns. When you look at the level of parity, though, we've started to see more and more books come out with odds to win the conferences this year. And there are two teams that are a cut above, Ohio and Toledo, with odds shorter than 3-1, depending on the books you shop around. Obviously, that's a little bit more of a consensus than anything else. But we have seen long shots crash the party in the past. When you look at conference futures in general, I know you're a huge win totals guy. You're able to identify edges a lot faster than most in those particular markets. Do you find yourself betting into some of the higher hold markets that are the conference futures as well, especially with the G5 leagues when those come available? Or do you feel, hey, look, there's way too much volatility. Oftentimes I can't identify that same quantitative edge that I can find if I'm betting 8 or 9 win totals on those same conference teams?
Yeah, it's definitely less volume than the win totals market. I mean, number one, because it's such a high hold for the books. Now, like any market, shop. So if you're seeing a team priced, across the board 25-1 to win the conference, and you see that outlier book at 50-1, and you can picture a team making a run, then certainly I'm not opposed to that. But I mean, for the most part, a lot of conferences in college football are pretty chalky. I think what happened is we had a couple of seasons. I don't know if it was because of the extra year of eligibility due to COVID, but that 2021 season where we had, 3-4 conference winners across college football that were 60-1 or greater, ended up winning the conference, like Pittsburgh in the ACC. Northern Illinois came from nowhere and won this conference, the MAC. Utah State winning the Mountain West. I think last year, for the most part, we saw a return to normalcy, and that is, college football tends to be, for the most part, pretty chalky. If you can identify that team, kudos. I haven't had luck with the seeing a team. Well, I can definitely see this team going from, like Northern Illinois, from 0 wins to winning the conference. I haven't always been good at identifying those teams that are, highly variant, where I stick in my wheelhouse. I just bet win totals. I'm not opposed to betting conference futures. I'll probably on average bet 2 or 3 per conference, but I mean that includes if I think the favorite's mispriced. I'm not afraid to bet a lot of favorites in those conferences.
I think it's a great point and one that people often ignore. They play away from their strengths. I mean, look, if you can find an edge in win totals, there's no reason to try and diversify your portfolio to take flyers so you can go out there and say, hey, look, I caught lightning in a bottle. And to your point last year, I think the two that stand out to me, the Sun Belt obviously had 2 teams at prices at 10-1 or greater with Troy against South Alabama, and then Tulane, a team that, ironically enough, I think a lot of us were high on coming into the year. But if you'd asked me if I thought the Green Wave had a legitimate shot to go from 2-10 to winning the AAC before the year, I probably would have laughed at you, although I guess it was an eye-opening win against Kansas State, and shame on me for not thinking that was a harbinger of things to come with Willie Fritz and company. But always fascinating, and glad we have a chance to pick your brain on that, because I know it's the one question I get a lot of people that ask me, especially in the single-game parlay era that we're in now, Brad. Yeah. Oh, where can I put up a little bit of money to make a lot? Spoiler alert here, betting Kent State at 100-1, probably not the best use of limited capital going into the MAC football season this year.
No, and watch, they'll make a run. I don't see it. That'll be, we'll talk about that at the end of this. It'll be a while until we talk Kent State, but if you feel like you can identify that program that's going to make that monster jump, by all means, it's not my greatest strength.
Hey, I mean, look, if Julian Edelman and Josh Cribbs come walking through that door for Kent State, all bets are off, and maybe there's a possibility that this team can exceed odds makers' expectations with their win total and pull off a Cinderella effort to win the league. But if they're going to do so, there are some teams that legitimately look like favorites on paper, and we can start with one of Kent's biggest rivals in the Toledo Rockets. Jason Candle enters his 8th season in Toledo. The win total for the Rockets, 8.5, shaded to the over. Toledo finds themselves as favorites as a price just shy of 2-1. They won their first MAC West title in 5 years. This is a program that I'm sure you know all too well, have some of the best facilities in the entire conference. They've made commitment to their football program. Probably a little bit surprising that they haven't been the model of stability in recent years, knowing some of the competitive advantages they have over their compatriots. But if there's reason to be optimistic about Toledo this year, Brad, it all starts with the dual threat quarterback that they'll have under center.
It does. DeQuan Finn, a legitimate, one of the better athletes, one of the better talents in the MAC. Now, I think he needs to be a little bit more consistent as a passer. 23-12 ratio isn't outstanding. Obviously, he is that dual threat. He had over 600 yards rushing. Let me preface, though, before we start getting a deep dive into this team as far as the roster and the players, I am not a big Jason Candle fan. I think he's supremely overrated. I'm not a fan of the game management, the motivational tactics. Look no further. Last 2 years, Toledo, you mentioned all the advantages they have. They do, and it gets priced that way in the markets.
Yep.
Toledo has lost 7 games combined the last 2 years outright as a touchdown-plus favorite. You want to talk about, I know they're the defending MAC champs. I still cry that they underachieved by 2-3 games last year. They should have been a double-digit win team, no question about it. So I'm not a fan of Jason Candle. But when you start diving into personnel, I am always a fan of Toledo's personnel for the most part. DeQuan Finn, top rusher back, leading receiver back, offensive line 4 starters. At least on paper, this should be the best offense in the MAC this year.
I think back to Toledo, and it wasn't last year. It was 2 years ago, I want to say, although everything blends together. I watched their game in its entirety against Colorado State. And, Brad, that may have been the worst football game I think I've seen a team that had talent and was unable to go out there and execute. It had to be 2 years ago because it was before Colorado State went through the coaching change. But, my Lord, it made me not want to watch a lot of MAC football the remainder of the season, knowing that Toledo was one of the better teams in the league, and that was the kind of floor that team could have any given Saturday.
And keep in mind, I remember that well because the week before, they should have beaten Notre Dame in South Bend. All DeQuan Finn had to do, now this, asking this of a young college kid is something, but if he runs for a touchdown with like a minute and a half left for Toledo to take the lead. If he falls down at the 2-yard line, Toledo can run out the clock, kick a field goal, and beat Notre Dame. But he scores a touchdown instead, and Notre Dame comes down the field. So the week prior to that Colorado State performance that was pathetic, Toledo almost beat Notre Dame. So that just goes to show you the inconsistency this program has.
Yeah, talk about volatility. It's something that we've grown accustomed to in the MAC. What's interesting about Toledo, they'll have a chance to make a big statement right out of the gates as they find themselves slightly more than a touchdown underdog on the road in Champaign against Illinois. Toledo wins that football game. A lot of reason to be optimistic about what they can accomplish, not just within the league where they are the team to beat, but also gaining a couple of national headlines there. One last thing on Toledo, Brad. We talked a lot about their offense. Anything of note worth mentioning as far as what this team brings back on the defensive side?
I think there's 2 things, and they're pretty disparate. Number one, let's start with the positive. Secondary, I think, could be the best secondary in all of Group of 5 football. They were number 12 in the country in pass defense last year, the 3rd lowest passing success rate in the FBS. We'll throw one of those key analytics terms for Payne since he can't be here to talk about all that. But, this is a legitimately good secondary last year, and everybody's back this year. They're led by Mitchell, led the nation 25 passes defensed a year ago. That's PBUs and interceptions. That's an incredible stat. That's the positive, that they have a great secondary. What I worry about is up front. There's when I'm looking scouting and who's good, who isn't at this level. I thought their 3 best guys, the 2 Johnson kids and Jamal Hines up front, I thought they were the 3 best players on their defense, and they're all gone. They combined for 15 sacks and 32 tackles for loss. So without those 3 guys up front, and they were multiple-year starters, I do question a little bit on Toledo's up front. And we'll find out right away because Illinois is going to want to run right down their throat.
That's what I was going to say. If you're a little bit light in the trenches, Illinois is not the opponent that you want to face right out of the gates, that's for sure, in some of the heat and what should be about a 40% full building down there at Memorial
You could probably
Stadium.
guess what I bet in week 1 there. There's an extra bonus bet for you guys.
I was going to say we can let them read between the lines here, Brad. Look, you can't give away all the answers to the test right out of the gates. We need our listeners to do a little bit of homework on their own. But Toledo, no doubt, a worthy favorite when you look at how short they are to win the conference at a price just less than 2-1. Didn't do my job as a host at the top of the show. Want to encourage all of you, our loyal listeners out there, to follow Brad on Twitter at BradPower7. Help him inch closer towards filling Outson Stadium and that 54,000 threshold that's out there. You can follow me on Twitter at Todd Furman. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And if you're really bored, you can follow Payne at Payne Insider. From the Rockets program to Athens, Ohio, where we'll talk a little bit of Bobcats football. And Tim Albin enters his third season. Looks like he's turned things around a little bit. Ohio's win total, 7.5, shaded over. A very intriguing start for the Bobcats as they'll take on San Diego State, a good East versus West showdown that I think provides an outstanding litmus test for two Group of 5 leagues. When you look at Ohio, this is a program that finished hot, including a win in the Barstool Classic, or whatever the hell they're calling that bowl in Tucson. And after a 2-3 start in Tim Albin's second season, this is a program that really surged late. And a lot of that, Brad, had to do with a starting quarterback, albeit one that wasn't with the team when they finished the season, given the fact that he tore up his knee. But for all the praise we want to heap on DeQuan Finn's shoulders, easy for me to say, the man under center, Curtis Rourke in Athens, clearly the player that every college football fan should know about.
Yeah, Curtis Rourke for Ohio. His brother obviously was a multiple-year starting quarterback for Ohio, had much success, but Curtis might have a higher upside than even his brother. And when healthy, he is the best player in the MAC. And the reason he's a little bit better than DeQuan Finn is just because he's not only a dual threat, but he's a much better passer. 25-4 touchdown-interception ratio. As long as he's healthy, again, this should be one of the best offenses in the MAC. Now, I will say this. He goes down to injury, and you think season's lost. Now, they ended up losing to Toledo in the MAC championship game, but I thought C.J. Harris played well in his absence. They needed to win their last couple of games to get to the MAC championship. And then, of course, C.J. Harris led the come-from-behind win against Wyoming in the bowl game. So if Rourke's not healthy at the start of the season, I think they'll still be okay with Harris. I'm glad you did mention that San Diego State game. If you're looking for a sneaky good Week 0 game, that's the best Week 0 game on the board, Ohio-San Diego State, if you really want to get in the weeds. Because you'll see an Ohio team, not just Curtis Rourke, but they have the MAC freshman of the year running back. He returns. Bangura, he topped 1,000 yards. Their leading receivers back. So it's going to be a quite potent Ohio offense.
When you look at Ohio, are you surprised that this team hasn't won the conference, given what they've been able to put out there year in, year out? I mean, Frank Solich kind of brought them to a high level, but they haven't been able to reach that mountaintop, over the last 30, 35 years.
It's been even longer than that. 1968 is the last time Ohio won the MAC. That's incredible to me. I think it's just, I hate using this word. I would say it's poor luck. I mean, they have made 5 MAC championship games, and a lot of those games have been close losses. They made 12 bowl games since 2006. So, I mean, I think this is the model program in the conference, and it's remarkable that they haven't won a conference championship. I mean, they've been remarkably consistent. I think they have the best culture. I think they get, for the most part, the most out of their talent, at least out of the last 15-plus years since Solich took over. But I just think it's just poor luck that this program doesn't have 2 or 3 MAC championships in that period of time.
And this is a program last year, Brad, that, I mean, even when Curtis Rourke went down, we saw them trend upwards on the defensive side of the ball. Hopefully a reason for optimism there for Bobcats fans. But you pulled out an interesting note, and I think it's important, and this is a great teaching moment for you to share with a lot of our listeners out here who, quite frankly, don't have the time to deep dive the teams the same way that we do. And it's why we try to provide some of the best information that we know oftentimes can become obsolete. If you're listening to this MAC preview the second week in August, it may not resonate the same way here at the tail end of May. But there was a lot of disparity out there with some pretty prominent publications in terms of what exactly Ohio was going to bring back in terms of returning production.
Yeah, so Bill Connolly, if you follow college football, does a really good job. So I'm not going to be bashing him too much here. It's just, it's key to have the most up-to-date information. So I'll perfectly be frank. I use a lot of his stuff, incorporate a lot of his stuff into my own rankings. But I also think it's important to do your own work, because in Bill Connolly's February returning production rankings that I see a bunch of people still quoting to this day, whether it's content providers, people in the industry, just general media people, Ohio was number 114 in those February returning production rankings. He just updated them, Bill Connolly did, here just last week in May. They're number 22, so they rose about 100 spots. What does that do to a team's power rating? I mean, that's going to move their power rating and probably a touchdown. So make sure you have the most up-to-date info, or, I mean, I'm so old school. If you looked at my desk, I have a foot, literally 12 inches stacked of papers where I literally print out every start chart, every stat pack from a year before, and literally go to the latest roster, and I literally check and see every player in college football to see if they're still on that roster from last year, and I just do my own returning production.
Wait, people still use pen and paper in this digital age? I didn't think that was allowed, Brad. I thought everything had to be done on an Excel spreadsheet, and you had to use AI through 37 computer neural networks to be able to get some of that kind of data
I'm a little behind, but I will say this. I don't know if there's something to me, the way my mental makeup is. When I write it down, it just I remember it better than typing it into a spreadsheet. I don't know what it is. I just remember it. It just becomes ingrained in my mind. And when I'm betting this stuff on openers, I can't always rely on my computer. I got to make a decision in a second. I can't even look up at a computer screen. Oh, what's this say? I have to have this stuff memorized. So writing it down for me is still, I'm old school, and I guess I'll be that way even though I'm only 40. I'll be that way until I'll be way out of touch in 20 years.
Hey, it's all what it takes sometimes with muscle memory, and you find the tools that work for the trade, especially in this racket where you do have to make those split-second decisions, especially for someone like yourself on Sundays, when you got about 2 seconds to decide which way you're going on an opener, knowing that number may not be there a minute down the road. From the Ohio Bobcats, we can take a look at the Miami Redhawks, led by Coach Chuck Martin, who will enter his 10th season. Their win total sits at 6.5, shaded to the over at minus $1.30. I mean, this is a program 15 games above 500 in MAC play with a pair of division titles over his last 7 seasons. When you look at the Redhawks, probably not a ringing endorsement when you have a head coach that says he hates analytics and is openly willing to share that particular opinion in the year 2022. And it showed up with some of their fourth down conversions. And the Redhawks have only attempted 124 fourth down conversions during the last 7 years, 101st in the FBS, and as a result are 5 games under 500 in games decided by just 1 score. But when you look at Chuck Martin, and while he may be old school in that regard, Brad, he has gotten the most out of this team, especially on the defensive side. But as we talk about a lot of these teams, coaching is of the utmost importance. So is quarterback play. And there may not be a team with a win total at 6.5 in the MAC that could be more unsettled at the quarterback position than what's going to take place in Oxford this fall.
Yeah, I mean, the offense and Chuck Martin leaves a little bit to be desired because of, it's very conservative, at least in today's day and age. I'll give him a little bit of a pass last year. Keep in mind, Brett Gabbert came into the season, the starter. This is the kid that won Miami, Ohio, the MAC in 2019 as a freshman. He got injured. They had to go to a freshman, Avion Smith. He's a more runner than thrower, so they went super conservative. That's one of the main reasons why they had, when you look at just total offense, they're bottom 10 in the country. Offensive success rate, bottom 15 in the country. So I could understand why they weren't successful last year. It'll be interesting to see what happens, though, this year. Gabbard's back healthy. You would expect him to be the starter, but I did like what I saw from Avion Smith. I mean, he should be improved. But then they go out and get a Colorado transfer in Maddox Kopp, which I'm kind of surprised that they went out and got a transfer. They might have done it because Gabbard himself entered the transfer portal, and there was some uncertainty there before he decided to come back. So here's what I do know. I think the quarterback play, this isn't saying much, will be improved this year. Therefore, I mean, if it's improved, I think that puts Miami, Ohio right in the mix to win the East.
When you look at Miami, if they're going to be successful, I mean, for an offense that's lacked creativity, ingenuity, and an aggressive tendency over the years, is there reason to believe that this team defensively can be up to some of those standards that we've seen Chuck Martin groups set in the past?
Yeah, I think so. It's one of his better defenses that he's had, and that's even losing a kid like Ryan McWood, who had 135 tackles last year. I like that Salopek kid. He had 124 tackles, so you can see they're very linebacker-driven, very old school in that regard. They got some guys on the edge that can get after the passer, and a couple edge guys, and Ugwu and Subtle that can get after the quarterback. I think they got enough defensively that they'll be at least competitive. There'll be a lot of close games, and that's kind of the story of this conference. I mean, very competitive across the board, and let's see if let's see if he can embrace an analytic or two and go for it on fourth down a little bit, and maybe turn that negative win-loss record in close games around this year with an experienced quarterback.
One thing when we look at the Redhawks, their schedule doesn't do them any favors out of the gates. They're going to start with 3 true road games at Miami down there in Coral Gables, at UMass. Of course, going to Amherst isn't like walking into Sanford Stadium by any stretch of the imagination. The rivalry that we see renewed at Cincinnati, they'll have a home date with FCS member Delaware State, and they'll go on the road to Kent State. Does that give you any reason to be concerned? Or do you think that's the kind of thing that, hey, look, you're playing football in the MAC. We've seen it from Kent State in the past. This is kind of how you have to go about your business, and you use it as a good test to figure out exactly where you're going to be before conference play kicks off.
Yeah, I don't think it's as bad as what it's been for my Ohio, at least in recent years. And Chuck Martin doesn't value non-conference play much. Look no further. He's 45-59 overall at my Ohio. You'd think they'd fire him. Well, the reason he doesn't get fired is he's got a winning record in MAC play, including 33-18 the last 7 years in conference play. I think having at least a couple wins in non-conference, I'm counting obviously Massachusetts and Delaware State. I mean, typically they might get 1 win in non-conference to get 2, and then you get into MAC play. I'm more bullish on this team, at least on the market. I bet over 6.5 wins, and that's widely available.
Interested to see that game against UMass and the tenacious Don Brown defense. That one won't exactly be one for the college football purists looking for the scoreboard to be lit ablaze with plenty of big touchdowns there by any stretch of the imagination. From Oxford, Ohio, out to Western New York, and discussion of the Buffalo Bulls. Head coach Maurice Lindquist enters his 3rd season. They find their win total 6.5, shaded to the under at a lot of shops. Buffalo, right in that middle tier, around plus $6.50, plus $7 to win the league. And when we look at what they accomplished last year, I think the best adjective to describe their season was disjointed. Lose 3 straight, win 5 in a row, struggle down the stretch, and finish with a hard-fought 23-21 Camellia Bowl victory, a bowl game that I found myself on the wrong side of.
Me too.
As far as result, despite beating the market by what we beat it by about a full field goal there, Brad?
Yep.
So when we look at expectations for Buffalo, I mean, I've seen some people call them the potential sleeping giant, given that they recruit from a slightly different footprint than a lot of the rest of the MAC. When we look at Maurice Lindquist as a whole, he has some difference makers on the defensive side. They have a returning quarterback who I wouldn't describe as elite by any stretch of the imagination, but I guess capable, and I don't mean this as a slight. So when you go about assessing Buffalo and where they can stack up in the MAC this year, what are you most intrigued to see? Where do you feel the most confident in what this group brings, and some of the biggest question marks that they'll have to answer?
I am most confident in the talent that he's brought in. He's brought in 70 players the last 2 years. You thought they were okay under Lance Leopold, but he's totally changed this roster in quick order. And they've signed the best overall class in the MAC. That's freshmen and transfers included the last 2 years. So I'm buying the talent level. But, I mean, there's some missing pieces. I mean, you mentioned it. Cole Snyder's fine. He impressed me in the bowl game. I didn't think much of him throughout the regular season, but I liked what I saw there. I worry about if there was a group that really impressed me watching that bowl game. I watched it because I had, obviously, an anti-Buffalo position, but Justin Marshall and Williams at wide receiver were really good, and they're both gone. They really like this McMillan kid who really had a good spring game. I like the Harding kid. Daryl Harding is a transfer from Duke. I think he can play. But I don't know. I think the offensive line is okay. Running back's okay. I don't see. I mean, if you're comparing them to the Toledos and the Ohios of the world as far as offense, I mean, they're definitely a notch below. Defense, James Patterson was their mainstay, a staple for them the last 3-4 years. They do have that Dolak kid, 147 tackles, so they'll be okay there. I like their nose guard. They got a good guy in the secondary, Marcus Fuqua, who had 7 interceptions last year. So there's some pieces for them to make a run, but with all that said, what you mentioned, very inconsistent last year. I mean, I made some money on them during the middle of the season. The market, and this is kind of in the weeds, but I mean, get out that pen and paper if you're old school. I typically see this, Todd. They lost to Holy Cross, a good Holy Cross, a good FCS team. They lost on a Hail Mary. Market threw Buffalo in the trash last year. Right after it, Buffalo covers like 6 straight games. So and then they fell off the face of the earth the last 3 games of the season. Then they all of a sudden, surprise in a bowl game. So I just don't see it there from a coaching aspect, consistency in play for me to say, hey, this is a team I'm willing to take over Miami of Ohio and Ohio in the East.
I mean, look, you talk about inconsistent. I had a piece of Akron in that regular season finale. The majority plus the points also dabbled a little bit on the money line. I thought Akron was going to find a way to win that football game outright. Granted, it was played at an unusual time. It felt like 9 o'clock in the morning, I think, Pacific time, in front of 27 fans in attendance for that game since it had been rescheduled. But I mean, that was the whole thing with Buffalo. You didn't know what you were going to get on a week-in, week-out basis. And look, their non-conference schedule, while they only play one Power 5 team at Camp Randall against the Wisconsin Badgers to start things, 2 very intriguing games that you highlighted, one at home and one on the road against Group of 5 teams that we think can be competitive and be able to push this team as it pertains to their win total and exceeding odds makers' expectations.
Yeah, home against Liberty and a road game against Louisiana Lafayette. We'll find out even before conference play where Buffalo stands, or we'll watch them win those 2 games. Oh, I'm buying in. This is maybe your MAC champs, and then they'll lose to Kent State or whatever. So I am a little bit bearish. I will say I'm not sure that it's widely available, but I did take under 7 wins on this team. I just think 6 is a lot more likely than 8.
Always poke around, as we encourage all of our listeners to do. Get the best of the number with these win totals. A half game here and a half game there can substantially flip your ROI from some of those preseason positions. From Buffalo to Eastern Michigan, the Fighting Chris Creighton's find their win total at 7.5, 7-1 to win the Mid-American Conference, and they completed arguably the best ever season in program history with 9 wins last year. Still seeking that first title game appearance, though. 30-year bull drop before Creighton took over. He has created a model of stability, relatively speaking. But when you look at Eastern Michigan, Brad, compared to the rest of the league, I mean, we talk about star power, and we use that term loosely to describe impact players on both the offensive and defensive side of the MAC. But this truly feels like that factory mentality that they embrace, that they talk about, really should resonate because it's the sum of all its parts better than any individual with this Eagles team.
Yeah, so, I mean, this program, for the most part, has had a ceiling, and certainly Chris Creighton has got them to this ceiling on a consistent basis. I mean, this was one of the worst Power 5, the FBS programs in all of college football for a majority of my life. I mean, for 30 years, I mean, I would put this in the bottom 5 as far as FBS programs, and yet he's turned it around, made it a consistent winner, been to several bowl games, finally broke through and won that bowl game. Talks about the factory and that blue-collar mentality. I mean, it resonates. It also resonates with some of the fellow coaches. One thing that I like reading in some of the preseason magazines is they have these like anonymous scouting reports from opposing coaches. And in Athlon, this is one that stood out to me, at least in this conference. This is the coach is talking about this Eastern Michigan program. They said, take this as a compliment. They're dirty and mean. They want to fight you on every play. They'll fight you after the game. They don't get demoralized when they lose. So that says a lot to the culture that Chris Creighton's created. I will say this, and this doesn't necessarily mean for this year, that ceiling might be getting higher because they had their best recruiting class in school history. They just signed the freshmen coming in. It was the best recruiting class as far as freshmen in the MAC this year. So maybe they've finally broken through. And I'll say this, I was on campus last year there. They had a bunch of the players working out in one of the indoor facilities. I couldn't believe they even had one, to be honest with you. But I was amazed. Like, I'm so weird, but I look at random stuff. I was looking at the parking lot, and I couldn't believe the difference in license plates. I saw Texas. I saw Wyoming. I saw Virginia. I saw Georgia. I'm like, they're getting all these kids to come up here to Ypsilanti, Michigan to play. So they're doing something there, and I actually think if I had to buy stock, I would be buying that, hey, they will be making a MAC championship game. They'll break through and maybe even win a MAC title here in the next 3-4 years.
And you know what's funny about that? And I wish I had the source, and if my information's incorrect, look, our listeners will be the first one to call me out, so I encourage them to do so. But I remember reading, I don't know if it was last year or maybe right when NIL officially got off the ground, that apparently there's some money around the Eastern Michigan program, and there were some prominent alums who talked about trying to build this football program up, committing resources. So maybe that's contributing to stronger recruiting, and we'll see if that's something that's truly sustainable for this team going forward. if they're going to be a legitimate player and be able to compete with the Toledos and Ohios on a week-in, week-out basis. But you mentioned coaching, and Chris Creighton has really been able to do that. You see a guy that's been there for quite some time and clearly getting the most out of his players. Not the most exciting brand of football, but when you're mean and nasty in the trenches, you can make up for a lot of that skill disparity just in terms of will to win when you're playing in some of those miserable weather games that we've grown accustomed to during the portion of the MAC conference played on weeknights during the month of November.
Certainly, and they got the guys to do that. I mean, I do worry a little bit about the offensive line. That was one of their biggest strengths. They lost a left tackle to Missouri. Their left guard was taken in the 4th round in the NFL draft, so that'd be a worry. But they still have the running backs to do it. Samson Evans, 1,000-yard rusher. I even like his backup, a little kid that runs really hard, Jalen Jackson. So I think they'll certainly be capable to play that style of play that they've been accustomed to the last 5-6 years. Their linebacker, Chase Klein's probably their best player on defense. I do worry a little bit on that outside. That Ramirez kid was really good. He was also drafted. He had 12 sacks a year ago.
When we look at some of the directional Michigan schools, I think a lot of people, Brad, myself included, really believe that Central Michigan could be one of those sleeping giants, so to speak, when they brought in a coach that has the resume of a Jim McElwain. Their win total sits at 5.5, shaded to the under, and we're looking at Central big picture, 22-1 to emerge atop the heap as MAC champions. And obviously the team fizzled last year compared to what was expected of them. There were expectations that they could become that perennial power. Obviously, as Coach Mack goes into another season, some of those things have to be dwindling. The floor may be higher, but maybe the ceiling isn't quite there. You look at some of the transfers that they've had. Richardson transferred to FAU only to see Casey Thompson come in and most likely take his job down there in Boca. Lou Nichols goes pro. And for the second straight year, it appears that this is a team that's going to lose multiple top pass catchers. But what's interesting about Central Michigan was what we saw start to unfold at the quarterback position. We talk about those dog days of November, frigid temperatures. The game that stands out is one that was played in about 37 inches of snow. And lo and behold, you had what appeared to be an NFL caliber athlete operating under center, one that'll be familiar to folks that were fans of the Atlanta Falcons back in the day, Burt Emanuel Jr., that just looked like a man amongst boys in terms of running the Central Michigan offense.
So let's start. I think you mentioned it. You hit the main points here. Central Michigan, I watched, and this is just a little over a year ago, 18 months ago. I'm watching them beat Washington State in the Sun Bowl. It's on CBS. So, I mean, they're getting – I mean, to get that kind of coverage for a MAC school is something. And it was a legitimate win. They were the better team. I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, oh, my God, Jim McElwain's going to build the best program here in the MAC here in quick, short order. Then they go 4-8 a year ago. So, a little bit back to reality. But you mentioned if there is something to be optimistic about this year, it is having a dynamic, and I mean dynamic athlete at quarterback, Burt Emanuel. I mean, in one game, he had almost 300 rushing yards against Buffalo last year. The worry that I have, though, I mean, as good of an athlete as he is, he played in 4 games, and he attempted 8, not 18, not 80, 8 passes in 4 games. So, obviously, that's going to be something they're going to have to work on, and I could see him splitting with the other kid, Jace Bauer, but he wasn't that good of a passer either. So, there's some things to work with. Where's this program at heading into 23? I think it's a little bit in between what we saw in 21 and not as bad as what we saw last year. So I think it's a 6-6 type of football team this year.
What do we think about what they're going to put on the field week in, week out on the defensive side of the ball? I mean, it appears that there is a good level of experience returning. But at the same time, it was a group that wasn't exactly going to bowl you over last year, where you came away watching 60 minutes of Central Michigan football going, man, this team is like the steel curtain on the defensive side of the ball.
I think you hit it again. They're much more experienced than what they were a year ago. 16 of their top 19 tacklers are back, so that's a positive. They just don't have a lot of guys, I mean, that are going to stand out. And, you know, believe me, look at the stats. I mean, they only forced 10 turnovers last year. There's just not a lot of dynamic athletes on that side of the ball for them. So they're just more experienced. I expect them to be a little bit better just because of that, but I don't expect this to be one of the best defenses in the MAC this year.
When it comes to returning production, and this isn't just for Central Michigan, it's something that obviously a lot of new handicappers fall victim to. I did when I first started doing a lot of this. Do you put more emphasis on players coming back, assuming they're going to get better, or is it, hey, look, This team wasn't that good with those players last year. There's no reason for me to believe that suddenly they're going to take this massive leap and look significantly different than when we have a full body of work, because what you've put on tape, you've told us what you're going to be as a defense, an offense, or any other position on the football field.
So it's a really good question. It's probably the question in today's day and age. It's loaded as usual. So it kind of depends. Are they experienced because they were playing as freshmen last year? Obviously, I just expect more of a natural progression from freshman to sophomore season than I do, oh, this guy's been a 2-year starter and now he's a senior. I'm expecting all of a sudden this great leap from him. So take a look at that. What's the class level here? Because I do think there's a bigger jump from freshman to sophomore than it is the upperclassmen. I will say this, though, for all those that are very negative towards returning production, I think in today's day and age, at the group of 5 level, it can mean a little bit more because we're seeing so many guys get poached from other conferences that there just isn't much returning production, period, in these conferences. So if there is a team that has a ton of production, I mean, I got to think that's, even regardless of the talent level, that's got to be a little bit of a positive. And all of our opponents don't have anybody back, and we do. I mean, come on. I mean, that's just handicapping 101 there.
I was going to say it almost feels like by default that players can move a little bit faster. They know the system. They don't have to try and think about all of their movements and be so deliberate that if you can read and react, even a kid that's not going to be that quick from 0 to 40 is suddenly going to find himself in the right spot to be able to make a play. So always fascinating and curious to get your take on it. I know when we look at some of the Power 5 conference teams, you know kind of what you're getting in terms of known commodities. And oftentimes, look, if a player hasn't seen the field till his junior or senior year, there's a reason for that, but it's a little bit different in some of these group of 5 conferences than what you'll see with the Georgias and Alabamas of the world. You talk about going from the highs and lows and some of the volatility in the MAC. No program has been a greater illustration of that than the Northern Illinois Huskies, and their win total sits at 5.5. You're looking at them as prohibitive long shots to win the conference at 28-1. Thomas Hammock hasn't exactly been the model of consistency by any stretch of the imagination as he'll go into his 5th season. You're looking at a team last year who had a revolving door at the starting quarterback position. I'm pretty sure there were some water boys out there who took reps. Rocky Lombardi comes back. This is a player who started his college football career back in 2017. And yes, 2017 is when he walked onto campus in East Lansing. Ethan Hampton comes back. There are a couple others as well. But Brad, I can't make sense of Northern Illinois and what I'm going to get on a week-in, week-out basis. I'm hoping you can provide a little bit of clarity as we try and handicap the Huskies.
I don't think anybody really can. I mean, again, I'll mention one of these scouting reports. One of the coaches says it's impossible to figure out Northern Illinois. You just don't know what to expect from them. I'll try to I'm going to say it's going to be a little bit of both this year. Instead of the incredible lows, 2020 didn't win a game, conference championship in 21, 3-9 last year. I'll say we get something in the middle this year, and I think it's a 6-6 type of team. I do like a lot of the experience. All the quarterbacks are back, and if Lombardi's healthy, that's a major positive compared to what they had a year ago. All 5 starters back on the offensive line. That's a rarity in college football these days. They do lose their 2 best skill position guys at running back and wide receiver, but they did a decent job in the transfer. That Iowa kid I think will be productive, Gavin Williams. Rudolph was a wide receiver that missed all last year. He's a second-team All-MAC guy in 2021. He returned. So a lot of positive as far as the returning production. They're just going to be, I would have to assume, better luck on the injury front this year. So they're going to be improved. I don't expect them to do what they did in 2021, go from the bottom of the league to the top of the league overnight. I don't expect that. I wouldn't be shocked if they doubled their win total, though.
Do you see any reason to be optimistic or more alarmed with what they're going to put out there in terms of a stop unit on a week-in, week-out basis?
I don't see a lot of difference makers. Again, returning production is good there, but I don't see a lot of elite guys. They did have a key transfer out after spring. Rayner, a linebacker. Again, some of the preseason publications will say that he's a key guy coming back. No, he's gone. He transferred to Kentucky, so that's an unexpected loss for them. So what do I expect from them? Probably below average in the MAC as far as the defense goes.
Hey, I mean, the answer can be as simple as not much, if that's the approach. For some of these teams that are looking to try and find difference makers, they may be on campus, but like we've talked about at great lengths, the transfer portal, not always kind to group of 5 members if they have players that are going to grab headlines and obviously catch the eyeballs of teams that are looking to try and fill needs at a slightly higher level. I want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, you can follow Brad on Twitter at BradPower7. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And if you haven't already done some of your off-season homework, the American Athletic Conference preview alive and well. The same with Conference USA as we continue to beat down the doors of the group of 5 and identify some of those wagering opportunities that are there. Muncie, Indiana we go for the Ball State Cardinals, who see their win total sitting at 5.5, shaded to the under. That's an adjustment from where some shops had opened it earlier this offseason. 30-1 to be MAC champions this year, and it's a group that finished poorly a season ago. Lost 4 of 5, but 3 of those games came by just 1 possession. But for Ball State, the real problem was offense. After scoring 30 or more in 3 of their first 5 games, they really struggled to get to the 3-touchdown threshold per game from there when they did tail off down the stretch. This is a program, Brad, that, at one time was known for its prolific offense. It felt like it was rinse and repeat with quarterbacks. You would find some underrated skill position players that were out there both at the running back and the wide receiver position. And then when you flipped on your set on a Tuesday night, you can count on Ball State being able to score 28 to 31 points. Doesn't appear to be that case right now, but you look at what they've brought in. A transfer quarterback in Lane Hatcher who spent some time honing his craft at Texas State and Arkansas State. This is a guy that has put up big numbers in various capacities, but I also wonder about what he's able to do leading this offense that may not have that many difference makers around him.
I think they'll be okay. I mean, on the surface, I was thinking, I want to fade Ball State when I was looking at the portal, and they lose Carson Steele, the MAC's leading rusher, to UCLA. They lose their starting quarterback, but to Illinois. And I'm thinking, it's going to be a really tough season for Ball State. I thought, man, for a MAC school, they did well in the portal. Lane Hatcher, you mentioned. I mean, this is a guy that I know he's been to 4 different schools, but he's got 10,000 career passing yards. I mean, he's got experience, and I would say he's maybe even an upgrade over John Paddock. So that was a good move there. So what you lose the MAC's leading rusher, so what do? You go out and get the second leading rusher in the MAC, Cooper from Kent State. Now, he's not big. He's 5'6", 184, so I'm not sure if he can handle, a 25, 30 carry a game type of guy, but that's at least some production there. And I don't get to talk it too much, but I really like their tight ends. They're both 6'6". They were highly productive last year, combined for 81 catches and 12 touchdowns. Brady Hunt and Koziel at tight end. So I think Hatcher's got some weapons for this offense, even with the losses, to be better than what they were a year ago.
What's your take on the coaching situation there? I mean, you read some of the Ball State fans that are out there. I think there are about 13 of them that like to have their opinions heard on the internet. And a lot of folks are surprised that Mike New's been able to keep his job for as long as he has in Muncie.
Yeah, I think he's on the hot seat. It might be bowl or bust for him. I don't know if that's necessarily fair for this season. But, yeah, if he doesn't make a bowl game, I would not be a bit surprised they end up making the change. A guy that won the MAC just a few years ago, but there was kind of the off season, the weird season of 2020.
You wonder how much goodwill you can build with your fan bases and, more importantly, your athletic department with some of these campaigns. But that's the one thing we see with a lot of these MAC teams is that coaches have a slightly longer leash, especially those that have won at some level, to try and be able to put that on their resume and claim they should be able to keep their jobs. A program, though, that'll be undergoing a little bit of a change at the head coaching spot in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where Western Michigan sees their win total at 4.5, heavily shaded to the under. Lance Taylor steps in and takes over for Tim Lester. Lance Taylor, previous stop was at Louisville as their offensive coordinator. Obviously, going to be a little while, Brad, for expectations to get back to the same team that went to the Cotton Bowl, what feels like an eternity ago for those programs. But they were able to at least bring in a transfer quarterback, so signs point to Hayden Wolf potentially having a chance, the former ODU product, to come in and lead this charge, a full 3-star recruit. But obviously, so many other questions have to be answered about what the Broncos are going to look like on a week-in, week-out basis.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Cotton Bowl, and maybe that made some unrealistic expectations, the P.J. Fleck era, that they fired an alum in Tim Lester, even though he had a winning record, and last year was his first losing season. And the team didn't quit. It's not like they had a terrible season. I mean, they won their last 2 games as 10-point underdogs against Central Michigan and Toledo, so they didn't quit. So I was a little surprised by that. Lance Taylor's only got 1 year of coordinator experience. He was a good running backs coach at Stanford and Notre Dame. I'm not sure he called the plays last year. So you're talking about a guy that's never even been a coordinator. So I think there'll be a learning curve there. Their last 2 recruiting classes, this might be when you're diving into the weeds, why Lester was fired. The 2 recruiting classes have been the worst. They got decimated by the transfer portal. Top rusher going to Minnesota. Top wide receivers going to Minnesota. Andre Carter, a defensive end, outstandings at Indiana. I couldn't get Payne to shut up about Braden Fisk, the nose guard that Florida State beat Notre Dame out for in the transfer portal. He couldn't. I mean, he had to rub that salt in that wound many times at dinner. So they lost a lot of outgoing talent. You mentioned, Wolf, does he move the needle? A little bit, just because of the fact that I did not like what they had returning at quarterback. So that's an upgrade there. But I'm not buying it. This is a team that's really going to struggle this year. And, man, if you can get out there and find that 4.5 or even 4 win total, I'm going under.
It's a sad day in college football, Brad, where you and Payne have to fight tooth and nail to try and bring in a Western Michigan transfer. You guys can't recruit 5 stars to fill these spots on your rosters before they end up at MAC schools. I mean, what the hell is going on down there in Tallahassee and South Bend?
He still was highly regarded. I mean, he pops on tape. He'll be I don't know if he's going to be an All-American, but when you're looking for quality depth or a guy who can play 20, 30 snaps a game, that's what you're looking for.
All right, we'll give you guys the benefit of the doubt then. Trust that your eyes are going to be indicative of exactly what Payne can expect from Brandon Fisk taking meaningful snaps opening weekend against LSU, a game that'll go a long, long way in defining what Florida State can or can't accomplish. Of course, we'll have a game in the books already for Notre Dame at that point when they travel overseas to take on Ireland. When we look around at some of the other programs remaining, I mean, Bowling Greens, the Akrons, the Kent States, I feel like I should let you take your alma mater wherever you want with a win total at 4.5, heavily juiced to the under. And while Bowling Green was a little bit of a Cinderella story, coming 1 game away from getting to the MAC championship last year, the odds very similar to what they were to win the conference a season ago. We're looking at Bowling Green 33-1. Thereabouts. And Scott Loeffler, can he catch lightning in a bottle and get this team back to the postseason? I'm not that optimistic, Brad. I'm hoping you can tell me why I'm wrong.
No, I'm not optimistic either. Even being an alum, I'm pretty negative about this team. We'll get more to that at the end here in just 5 or 6 minutes. Let's talk last year. 5
or 6 minutes. We may have about 25 or 30 minutes to go dedicated to Akron or Kent State.
No, I don't think so. Bowling Green, I mean, look, I thought they were fortunate last year. They won 5 games by 7 points or less. So, I mean, when you looked at them metrically, statistically, they were a bottom 10 team in the country and yet made a bowl game. Don't believe me. I mean, the opposing coaches aren't buying this Bowling Green team. I mean, I thought this was funny in Athlon. This is a quote from a opposing coach. Honestly, they're still not a very good program. They just benefited from right place, right time in conference play last year. They got lucky. And, I don't like using that word, but I saw that. I mean, I look at the Toledo game, the Marshall game. They caught lightning in a bottle. They lose a quarterback in Matt McDonald I wasn't a fan of. They replace him with Connor Bazelak. He's got a ton of experience. So I don't think that's a negative so much as far as a big downgrade. They did lose their playmaking wide receiver to Arkansas, but I actually think the biggest loss for this team is up front on the defensive line. Carl Brooks, in my opinion, probably was the best overall player at Bowling Green the last 7-8 years. It's not going to move a needle nationally when you're looking at a team, but he was worth something to a point spread. He's one of those rare guys, non-quarterbacks, on a defensive lineman that, I mean, I would think he's worth a half point to his team, and he's not there to clog up that middle. He's a guy that even impressed in the Senior Bowl practices. So to not have that guy and you lose your top 2 tacklers, I think the defense takes a big step back this year.
I'm not sure if it's a big brain move or it's one necessitated by desperation, but I did find it interesting reading about Bowling Green that Coach Loeffler wanted to start spring practice in January, knowing this team had played a bowl game to figure out exactly what positions they had to address in the transfer portal. Depending on how you look at it, I guess it's glass half full or it's glass half empty for life as a Falcon fan.
I'm going to go negative, half empty. I mean, we don't see programs in that neck of the woods. They started spring practice, I think, January 30th. I mean, that just something outside the norm. And it's not like some young up-and-comer that's thinking totally different about the game that maybe we should have, let's take a look and see if this works. I mean, I'm not buying it. I'll tell you another guy's not buying it. The old man who's, who watched it. He was in person, watched a couple of Bowling Green games last year. And look, he doesn't know anything about gambling, my dad, but he does know player personnel, and he does know coaching X's and O's about as good as anybody that I met. And he went to the bowl game, and he just said, man, the Cherry Kill is so much better than Leffler. It's unbelievable. He's not a big fan of the coaching staff at Bowling Green, put it that way.
What does Pop say about the tailgate scene at Bowling Green? I mean, is he out there with the barbecue and everything else, or is he the guy that's rolling in 5 minutes before kickoff because he knows there's plenty of good seats still available?
The latter. Yeah, I
respect that kind of hustle, Brad. I respect that kind of hustle.
There's not much of the tailgating scene there. I think he's happy to get, it's so cold at BG. I mean, in those November games, the wind whipping through the Doit there, I think he's just happy to be warm, to get a hot cup of chocolate or something.
Hey, a little bit of bourbon goes a long way. Get a little hand warmers in there. Keep those extremities toasty, and be there to cheer on the local team. Good for Bowling Green to get to a bowl game. Apparently, though, going to be a little bit of a long shot to get back there this year. And then the rivalry that everyone wants to talk about, and we don't have to dedicate time individually to these two programs that compete annually for the Wagon Wheel Series, where Kent State leads the series 27-24-1. In the last 52 meetings. Akron, their win total 3.5, shaded to the under, although we did see glimpses of what this program could be last year as we got deeper into the campaign under Joe Moorhead. Whereas Kent State, they'll come in, they'll start from basically a year zero. Kenny Burns takes over. Not something all that common when your head coach goes, you know what, I'm Bolton because I'm going to be an offensive coordinator in Boulder. But when you look at Akron and Kent State, what are some of the things better should be looking for this far out?
I'll start with a positive, that being Akron. I do think Joe Moorhead's building something. We saw it even in the markets last year. Maybe they didn't win a bunch of games, but they started covering a bunch of point spreads, covered 6 of their last 9 games. One was a push. It showed up on the scoreboard, not just your pocketbook. I mean, they lost 5 games by 1 possession last year. Just being competitive said that this was a much improved program. The fact that they're able to be competitive with minus 13 turnovers said something. They signed their best recruiting class in more than a decade. They got some pieces to work with. DJ Irons, if he's healthy at quarterback, and even that Undercuffler kid performed well down the stretch in the Buffalo and Northern Illinois games. So I think they're good at quarterback. They bring in Miami, Florida transfer, and Lingard, who's very talented, obviously. They got a LSU transfer at wide receiver that flashed last year. It was all MAC player. They got their best player on defense back. There's a lot to like about this team. Don't ask me the games that are going to win because I think they'll only be favored in 2 or 3 games, but this could be the program that shocks a lot of people if you're looking for higher variance, and would not be shocked if they made a bowl game this year. So I'm very positive on Akron.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, I saw a lot of that myself. I bet him against Ohio, a game that got away from him. I mean, giving up 55 points in Athens. But when you looked at that performance, it didn't look like an Akron team that was completely outclassed athletically. The depth was challenged there. But when you watch a player like DJ Irons go out there and make plays, they had a couple of receivers that were able to also impact things. And most importantly, for some of these teams, and what we always like to look for late in the year, especially with new head coaches, is that there was no quit, that they continued to make market improvements. There was fight. They weren't playing for anything, and we'll see if some of that momentum carries forward. And to be honest, this was a team, Brad, that I was looking to try and make a compelling case for, whether it was over their win total or to try and create a little bit of exposure there. But it's just the schedule may not allow for a lot of those opportunities by any stretch of the imagination. Kent State, they lose a ton. I'm not sure what to expect here. I mean, their win total is about as low as you're going to find, even in group of 5 leagues. When you look at Kent State's schedule, I mean, there's a reason they're 100-1 to win the MAC. They don't have nearly as daunting a Power 5 schedule, non-conference-wise, as they've had in the past, but clearly at UCF, at Arkansas, home against Central Connecticut, which should be a win, at Fresno, not exactly a soft landing spot for a first-year head coach.
No, this is one of those that Bill Connolly likes to talk about year 0 situations here. And speaking of 0, how about this? 0 returning starters on offense. I don't think I've ever seen that before on any unit, offense or defense. 0. That's far as
wild.
Yeah, and they had talent. It's not like they just lost some MAC guys. Well, I mean, their quarterback Colin Schleet's at UCLA. Walker, wide receivers at North Carolina, and I watched the spring game. They expect him to be a top 2 wide receiver for them. Cephas, another wide receiver, went to Penn State. I mean, they had some legitimate talent there. I think the most talented guy was their head coach, Sean Lewis, who I know his record is 24-31, but keep in mind with all those money games against legitimate Power 5 programs, not just a team like a Kansas State. I'm talking they were playing Oklahoma and Georgia and those types of programs of the world. I shouldn't have said Kansas State. I know they're defending Big 12
Look
champs.
at you taking cheap shots at what they're building there in the
that.
Little Apple there, Chris Kleiman and company, Brad.
Yeah, I wanted to say Kansas, and I forgot that they won, and then Kansas State rolled off the tongue. I shouldn't have said that. I mean, they were playing the elite Power 5 programs. I'll put it that way. And, man, to lose that guy to a coordinator job, to Colorado of all places, major loss. I'm not expecting much, but neither is the market. This is a team I wanted to bet under, but, man, they put it at 2.5. That's one of the lowest win totals in the country.
Yeah, you mentioned that non-conference schedule. Kent State definitely got their freaking flyer miles last year, and at least their kids got unique experiences playing in very diverse college football environments against power programs. At Washington, at Oklahoma, at Georgia, all in the first 4 weeks. To their credit, they at least held up well against Oklahoma, and Georgia covered those numbers, weren't able to accomplish that feat against Washington. Was a little bit surprised, though, they never were able to get their feet under them in conference play, and one thing led to another, and they were on the outside looking into the postseason despite having that level of experience you mentioned that'll no longer be with the program. You can follow Brad on Twitter at BradPower7. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there, as always, for all things Bet the Board. Follow the Bet the Board podcast at Bet the Board Pod. NFL offseason preview there. All of that information still very relevant. If you're looking for a little bit of ways to invest during the offseason, Cardboard Chat. Payne Insider does an outstanding job with Jesse Craig, a minority owner of PWCC Marketplace, breaking down trading cards and sports memorabilia. It's a perfect conduit for those folks that are fully immersed as sports fans to figure out how to get a little bang for their buck in an alternative investment class. And the Stay Green podcast we do week in, week out with Chris Wormy, covering all things on the track for NASCAR. And oftentimes, weather permitting, we'll offer up a best bet on race day. Did not have one this past weekend for the Coke 600. First time that we had seen qualifying and practice rained out for one of the NASCAR crown jewels. But Brad, before we let you go, and we are pulling a little double duty this week, so we'll be back a little bit later in the week for another Group of 5 conference. Wanted to get your take on what you might see as the best bet or the most actionable component as far as a potential win total or something else in the Mid-American Conference.
So, full disclosure, I bet 10 of the 12 teams win totals already. And I think I'm going to get to 11 on another team. But my favorite one, and this was one of my, I'm over 100 now, believe it or not.
33 schools left to go, Brad. There's still a chance for you to there's a chance for you to have exposure to all 133 programs.
I'll try. I wouldn't be shocked if I had more exposure on 5 or 10 teams. But one of my favorite ones I made was my alma mater, Bowling Green. Now, you mentioned the win total price out there. That's at one book as far as the 4.5 with the under shaded. There's a lot of disparity in all these win totals. I mean, you can almost find a win difference on any team. Pick a team and just shop around. I did look around as far as the under for this team, the current prices. Bowling Green, we're going to go under 5. We're going to lay some juice here. It is available at BetOnline, DraftKings, and all the Can Be Run books. Under 5 wins, Bowling Green. Priced anywhere between minus 140 up to minus 159. So we are laying a little bit of juice here. If you only got one out and it's FanDuel and you got to bet under 4.5 and you're getting plus 138, I'm okay with that bet as well. Here's what I see with Bowling Green. Obviously, I didn't see much as far as I don't like what they lost, particularly up front on defense. I thought they were extremely fortunate to get the 6 wins a year ago. You look at the schedule, I only have them favored in 3 games, and 2 of those are by less than a field goal. So I think it's a really tough schedule for them, starting with a road trip to Liberty that I don't expect them to win or cover in week 1. I don't see it there. I like that the old man doesn't see it as far as the head coach goes. I'm going under 5 wins, Bowling Green. My computer only makes it 4. So when I saw that opening win total at 5.5, I'm here to tell you, that was an open order situation. I just said get as much down as possible because I made it 4. And so obviously I think there's still a lot of value here.
We may need to bring on Papa Powers for his eye test assessment of teams. If we send him on a sojourn throughout the course of the MAC, I mean, depending on what his schedule looks like during August, Brad, I mean, we see it all the time with these NFL insiders that are going from camp to camp. We may have to pay for your dad's gas mileage, gas up the truck accordingly, offer to foot the bill for his hot chocolate allocation during November when he's outside for some of those cold weather games, and get his trained eye to offer up feedback and go, hey, look, this is a team trending in the right way. This is a team trending poorly. So we'll have to coach him up. We need as many boots on the ground as we can possibly get in this racket.
Fair enough. He'll like that. And the only reason I bring him up, because he loves this podcast for some reason. I've been in this industry 15 years, and I journalism degree, did some media stuff even almost 20 years ago now. And this is the podcast that he loves. And he doesn't love it because I'm on it. He seems to like Payne and Todd more than anybody that I've come across in this industry. He's always talking about this podcast for some reason.
Yeah, well, don't feel bad because my dad feels the same way. He goes, you talk an awful lot on this show week to week. He goes, no one's here to hear you. They're here to hear Brad and Payne. So I guess it resonates with all of our parents out there in one capacity or another. So I'm sure Payne's dad would feel the exact same. So it's good to know that we were all raised and reared the exact same way, that our fathers don't want to hear us. They want to hear the other experts that we bring on the show each week.
I do like that. We do have that in common.
Any other final words of wisdom, tidbits, etc. that you'd like to offer up? I know we'll be back a little bit later this week to talk all things Mountain West. So if there's something that pops in your head, we can obviously share it there. But I wasn't sure if there was a movie recommendation that you wanted to send people down a path, offer up your favorite Westerns between now and Friday. I mean, this is a safe space, Brad. You can share any opinion that you'd like.
I've shared enough today. We went an hour and 10 minutes on this conference. I'm sorry. I probably did talk too long on this one.
Hey, you know what? It's the MAC, and you're not going to get a more in-depth preview of the Mid-American Conference anywhere. No better source than a man who graduated from one of these proud institutions and finds a way in his heart to bet against them and make sure he shelves some of those recruiting and NIL dollars that he'd rather funnel to Notre Dame instead. Brad, we get where you're coming from in all of that regard. You can follow Brad on Twitter at BradPower7. I'm Todd Furman. Follow me there. You can follow Payne at Payne Insider. Most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And with a Bowling Green Falcons win total ticket under the posted total, hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.